So that's just one thing to be aware of. There's a natural incentive in the banking system to innovate around these restrictions.
Well, let's talk about how Germany has dealt with that. I'm not disagreeing with you, but Werner actually brought up that Germany apparently has the best banking system in the world. I would not have guessed that. And it has to do with the fact, start from the beginning here, is recognizing that the size of the bank determines the size of the operation it lends to, which I mean honestly makes sense. A big bank wants to make big loans to big business, medium loans to medium businesses, and small loans to small businesses. I mean, if you're a big bank,
is confirmed by research, by the way.
Confirmed by yes, and I mean it just makes sense. If you're a big bank, like, do I want to listen to 4 million people come through my office asking for $5,000, or do I just want to make one $200 million loan? Right? I'm not criticizing a big bank for wanting to make big loans, right? But with Germany, he points out that, at least in 2018, that 70% of banks in Germany are small to medium banks. Whereas, like in the UK, it was like 90% are, and when I say this, 70. I think it's not that 70% of the banks were small or medium. I think the proper way to say it is 70% of the money creation came from these banks. Nima, you could confirm or deny if you remember on that.
That's true. Yeah, that's
and
true.
then in the UK, it was more like 90% from big banks and 10% from small banks. And the result that we see is in Germany, it is the absolute, it rivals China with exports, despite having like 1/10, 1/15 of the population, and they rule the what did he call it? The
hidden superstars. Or
something like that. The hidden superstar market, which is to say, there's a lot of niche markets that German companies that we've probably never heard of are the top producers in. And he says the reason for this is because Germany has this community banking system that aims at, okay, the small and the medium, the small and the medium, the small and the medium, right? And furthermore, he said that Germany passed a law that addresses the point that you were bringing up before, is how do you slow the banking system down from making these speculative loans, to resist the urge to make these speculative loans. And he said the issue is, and this is totally hilarious because Dan Pena taught us to do it the way that he says is the problem. The issue is the relationship banker goes out and meets the business owner, and they get emotionally involved in the deal. They get emotionally involved in the person. And so when they come back, they want to give the loan. Maybe the underwriting isn't that great, but they have an emotional connection. They say, I like this and I want to do it. In Germany, it is illegal for the person who's the front side that goes out and talks to everybody to underwrite from the back end. You have to have two different people, one that looks at the cold hard facts, and one that goes out and interacts with the business owner. And then they independently have to give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And when they meet after making that decision independently and they're both thumbs up, then the loan is made. Apparently, that is a huge deal to addressing, Nima, what the issue that you just brought up. And ironically, so when I learned how to talk to banks from Dan Pena, he told us specifically you have to get the bank excited. Like, talk about your deal is like the best thing since sliced bread. And he said it's super duper important that you get in contact with that bank person, with the credit officer. And I will be kerfucked if I was able to get a credit officer on the line with over 20 banks for trying to fund my deal. Could not do it. And I'm wondering now that I listen to Professor Werner, that maybe the American banks have started to pick up that that's a good idea. to
Yeah,
keep
he
these things
doesn't
separate.
really talk much about the U.S. banking system actually, because he's been in Japan, he's from Germany, and he's worked in the UK a lot. So we don't even really, I don't even know at this point where the US banking system stands in his evaluation, but I think it's possible that it's maybe somewhere similar to Germany, because the US also has a lot of small community banks, even credit unions that lend to small businesses. And so, I would be surprised if there was similar kind of setup in the US as in Germany.
Well, I want to get up how to set things up, but before that, I do want to mention. So you brought up Japan. This guy was during the Japanese banking crisis in the 80s and 90s, he was in Japan advising the top Japanese people in the finance regulatory whatever what to do.
Also, he made a documentary called Princes of the Yen or Masters of the Yen.
I think it was Princes.
It was a book, and then there's a documentary to it, and one is named one way, one the other way.
All right, I see. And then apparently he was advising Ben Bernanke in 2008, and he said Ben Bernanke was the only central banker that actually took his advice when it came to quantitative easing, which apparently was the right thing to do, despite what all the Austrians have freaked out about since.
Well, because quantitative easing, the term has been bastardized since he coined. So apparently, this guy Richard
came up with quantitative easing. Yes,
came up with quantitative easing, but it was a specific policy. So he talks about, okay, so we have Japan in the 1990s with all these banks having made bad loans. How do we deal with that? Right? And his suggestion was central bank buys all the bad assets from the banks so they can start lending again. He talks about how people are saying, well, that's inflationary, that's moral hazard, etc. And moral hazard, I may agree to some extent if it doesn't come with some sort of
correcting thing with it. Yes,
but you got to do something. You got to go somewhere. It's better to have your banks start from a clean slate again than having them sit there with all
and then having the entire economy go to shit for it.
Happened. He talks about how the Japanese banking system in 1989 had maybe something like
25%. It was 20, I remember what you're talking about. It was 25%
bad loans, right? And he goes back to, I believe, the 1930s.
No, he goes back to right after World War II.
1940s. So Japan has been bombed to rubble. Everything, two cities.
If you don't mind me picking up, I think I remember more specifically than you. He said that the banking system in Japan, during and right after the war, was wrapped up in two things: one, lending to the government, obviously for military purposes, and two, lending to areas of Japan that weren't areas of Japan after they lost the war. This is like Taiwan, Korea, and Manchuria. And so after the war's over, 100% of the bank's assets were bad. All of them. And on top of that, in Japan at that time, he did mention, and I hope I get these details right, they didn't have like a corporate stock finance raising option at that time. You had to go to the bank to get your money. So like the banking economic system in Japan was about as level as all of its cities right after World War II. And what
they're lending to armament companies and stuff like. I don't know if they lend to the government. You just said they lend to the government. I don't know, but maybe to municipalities and provinces.
I think you may be right. Armament stuff, which obviously they're not doing that after they just lost the war. No more armaments. Yes,
your creditors are, dead possibly.
Yeah.
You're not going to see that money again. So 100% bad loans, and in response to that, they did quantitative easing, at least how he defines it. They bought all the bad.
The central bank bought everything at face value.
Yeah.
All of it. And then what? And then here's the thing he points out. What happened right after that? Japan was the economic miracle. Right? And in the 90s, going back to what you said, they had 25% bad loans. And they did have the corporate money raising stock finance option. And they decided to play with interest rates. And what happened? Stagflation for decades.
Yeah, they created a very long recession and deflation and very undesirable conditions in general. And also, how did we get there? He talks about that in his documentary. It's because the banks and the central bank abdicated their responsibility to direct the loan creation. And when its money started going towards financial speculation, property price, etc. At one point, I think there's one square in Tokyo was worth as much as all of California or something like that.
I remember hearing about that story, yeah.
It was the Emperor's Palace, to be fair, but still, it's just a lot that it was on. But generally speaking, once again, I think Professor Werner accurately identifies the cause of the 1989 Asia crisis and then the subsequent American crises as a situation where bank lending was not properly directed. And a lot of it started going to financial speculation. It caused all the undesirable outcomes that we've seen since then.
And what he found, because, okay, this is explosive information. It totally explains how everything works, and we got a game plan to go forward and fix everything. So he goes around telling all the high finance people in all these different countries and all these central bankers, and he says everybody agrees with him, nods along, says yes, that is a better way to do it, and then they don't implement anything that he ever says.
Right. Similar to what Warren Mosler has told us. They all understood what he said. They agreed. They were able to rephrase his arguments
back at him. Yes,
that they really grokked what he was telling them, but they didn't make the changes that he recommended.
And I mean,
I said, well, let's get into that, I guess.
Well, and then I mean, I did read another article by Werner that he thinks that because the central banks want more power and the people who are in charge want more power, they like the way that it is, and specifically via the current interpretation of the economic system, which we could make another show talking about, breaking down his article because he really breaks it down. It obfuscates who's responsible. So when a problem happens, the people who are in charge and do have the ability to fix things can go, oh, no, that person did it and that organization did it, and they were all the ones responsible, so everybody look over there. So if that's... What's that?
I'm just seeing some chats that came in, so we can respond to those in a sec.
Oh.
So, hi, Tommy. Preach it, Dylan. Okay, Jesus asking, why not push for federally funded public housing? That should bring down the cost of housing. Well, okay. Then he also says, maybe we can go back to the post office being a public banking institution, which can only lend out for business reasons, absolutely no consumer reasons. Yeah. I mean, that's...
we could talk about the moral hazard and pitfalls associated with going through the government like that.
Right.
But I do get his point.
Yes. So the thing is, like you said before, banking is a public thing anyways. I mean, it's public-private nowadays with the so-called private banks, but it is still a government license, and you're getting government privileges to do that
create money. Yes.
Create money. Yeah, I can't do that right now unless I have a bank. So the post office, like in Germany, was actually the same. There was, and I think it was probably all over the place. The postal offices were also banks, which makes sense because they had all these routes. You know, banking was in many ways, to a large extent, just logistics and having access to something that people can use as a medium of exchange. One point, I guess, it happened to be gold, and that's how the Rothschilds expanded their empire under gold standard. But yeah, so postal offices did that a lot all over the world, especially in Europe, that I'm aware of, at least. And what he's suggesting is basically, well, why not make the government into a bank and let the government lend? and that would be one option. But what you lose when you do that is the competitive aspect of different banks competing for loans and finding the best projects, having the desire to fund innovative projects. So you probably get some more stability. You lose out on some innovation in doing that. And the current banking system, if it was publicly regulated, if it was more soundly regulated, would be something like what he's saying there. It would be kind of like a step in the direction of.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, because if we take what I just described in terms of how the German banks are set up, where the front office can't be the same people as the back office, and we're regulating correctly, theoretically we'd stop shooting ourselves in the foot with the gun, going, well, all this gun does is shoot us in the foot. Well, maybe we should get rid of this thing, or maybe we should use it correctly. And I don't think it would be. I think we could have incredible improvements if we just adopted the right theory of how the damn thing works.
Yeah, that's the start.
Right?
You know, if you want to get anywhere, you're not going to get anywhere if you're operating on a false theory. And that's what we can get into now. Why is that the case? Why do we have this system? Everyone uses it. It's been around for so long all over the world, yet we can't even empirically establish how a loan is actually made. Why is that? Well,
oh God, I think we should have an own show for this. But go ahead.
Well, I think it's still part of this topic. Is why is the banking system so secretive? Why are the central banks so secretive? Why isn't there more public education? Well, it's because that's part of it's an asset for the banking system. It's an asset for the big banks, for people to not understand what the hell is going on, make it look like some kind of super complicated wizardry that we can't possibly see through. So
that's somebody else's fault. Yes.
Right. So it's let the experts deal with it. Once again, we see this all over the
always the experts. Yes. Do we need to read the Carol Quigley quote again? Do you have it ready?
I think I've bothered you enough with it. We have the same approach in different fields. So maybe that's also kind of helpful in understanding why is it like this. We've just had it in health, where we have the health authority telling us that there's numbers of COVID cases in different regions. And so here's how we fight those COVID numbers, is by wearing masks and getting experimental injections from the pharmaceutical companies. And then they do those things, and there's never any correlation established between the two things.
And there's never any follow-up, right? Like, oh, we did this, and there was no correlation. Maybe we should change what we're doing. No, none of that.
No post-mortem. It's similar with the central banking approach, right? Oh, we have inflation. Let's raise the interest rates. Did raising the interest rates stop the inflation? No, we still have inflation.
We'll raise them some more. Yeah.
Let's keep doing it anyway.
Yeah.
You know, that's from field to field, from industry to industry. We see the same approach of the centralizers. They create crises and obfuscate the situation and present themselves conveniently as a solution for the crisis.
Well, you aren't bothering me by bringing up the Carol Quigley quote again, but I'll see if I can paraphrase it, because I think it's worth bothering everybody else with, which is it's something to the effect of experts in anything can never be trusted because they become the vested interest in the thing that they're the expert of. Right?
He says everything is too important to entrust anything to experts, and that's because the so-called experts in any given field, they are more interested in maintaining their own status and aggrandizing themselves than reaching the objectives that their organization supposedly has.
Right. Like the banking organization supposedly, I mean, if we have the right theory in mind, is supposed to create money for productive purposes, right? No, we don't do that. Exactly. We serve ourselves, and we have this crazy story to make sure that you don't understand what's going on, so you don't catch on to the fact that we're serving ourselves. Go ahead. You want to read that verbatim?
Well, everything is too important ever to be entrusted to professional experts. Because every organization of such professionals and every established social organization becomes a vested interest institution more concerned with its efforts to maintain itself or advance its own interests than to achieve the purpose that society expects it to achieve.
Ding. Maybe the whole book of Evolution of Civilizations could just be replaced with that one sentence. So Werner realizes that no one from the top is listening to him.
Yeah. They're not going to listen because they have no incentive. They don't actually care to even achieve those objectives that you're talking about, dude. They're not interested in a productive economy, in a prosperous population, in a vibrant economy. That's not what they're interested in. They have very different interests. We don't even know what the end goal is for a lot of these people, but there's a lot of things. And it does seem to involve things like population reduction, making people more dependent,
removing the boundaries between the layers of government.
Yes. None of these things have anything to do with productivity and expansion and business and prosperity and all those things. Those are the stories they tell us, but the things they do paint a different picture.
So Werner says that he decided that from the top down isn't the appropriate approach. From the bottom up is the appropriate approach. And again, he turns around and he looks at Germany and he says, Germany's got it handled the right way. They've got community banks that apply their money creation toward small and medium productive concerns.
Yeah, so, one caveat. Yeah. He's also that the ECB has been at war.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Go ahead.
So the one thing that's working, the European Union is currently working really hard to dismantle and get rid of. They want to have a system of big banks and ultimately the central bank being in charge of directing the flow of credit for purely power purposes, not to create a great economy, but to create a vibrant, prosperous economy.
Right. And it goes back to what you just said now and what you've jumped up and down a lot. This is all about decentralization, right? We have to decentralize. And this is the thing that really excited me. And Nima and I are already like, should we start a bank? Is that if, how do I want to say this? If we want to create whatever we want to create and we need money to do that, why aren't we figuring out how to utilize or even create our own community banks in order to make that happen? Because if we recognize that money creation is what banking is, and that's fine, that's just what it is. Like, we don't need to be like, oh, this is the most evil thing because of fractional reserves, something or other. Oh, yeah, that was a great article. I think we could do another show just on that. Lost my train of thought. Nima.
Well, why don't we do these things? Why can't we? If we
why can't we do these things? I mean, I feel like all the people in the in quotes liberty movement, the people who are recognizing these massive issues, and they're like, oh my God, we need to fix this. We need to fight back. They're all begging for table scraps. Right? Maybe you're Alex Jones and you're the best at begging for those table scraps and you can make some money at it, but everybody else is begging for table scraps. And at the same time, they're going, oh no, the banking system's evil. The banking system's evil. Don't look at them. Oh my God, the central bankers and the Rothschilds. Oh, we need to go create our own system. No, the system, it's a tool. It's there. You could use it. If everybody who's watching this now or recording could like, share, and subscribe it helps us out a lot.
Yeah.
I hate saying it, but it's just true.